and then basically we go live.
Oh,
And I've
there
now
it is.
welcome, John. And
Hello.
I'm just going to let you go straight ahead and dive into what you've seen, what you know, where you want to start.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because you gave me a list of topics and I was thinking, goodness, which one do I go for? And then this one, how to mend a broken heart. It just kind of jumped out at me. And it's not one that I actually spend a lot of time talking about with people these days, but I'm pleased to be able to talk a bit about this today because it's actually been a big part of my own journey. And I was thinking about it and I was thinking, just before we got on the call, I was thinking, well, what does that actually mean to mend a broken heart? Like, what is that? And what was occurring to me was, when we become brokenhearted, when a relationship breaks down or it doesn't go the way that we want, we get a whole range of experiences that we have. It could be sadness, it could be grief, it could be frustration, anger, even if if we think somebody has done something in particular towards us. So for me, as I was sitting with that, I was thinking, well, there's something here about mending a broken heart is on some level about coping or getting over the experience that we have when a relationship doesn't go the way that we want it to. And so it got me thinking, and I started thinking about my experience of brokenheartedness. And I don't have a lot of experience brokenheartedness. I've not had a lot of romantic relationships in my life. I'm married to my first love. I've been with Linda now for 23 years, and we've been married for, oh gosh, I need to think about that, 13 years now. But it's like we've had a lot of relationships in that time. I was thinking, going back like to the very beginning of our relationship, and we had this quite stormy relationship. Linda was 17 and I just turned 20, and we were kind of all over the place. We were very up and down. 1 minute together, we were together, the next minute we were broken up, and then we'd be back together again, and then we'd be broken up again. And this cycle went on for a very long time. And I was thinking about, when we were broken up, of course there was, there'd probably be some reason we'd had a fight or something like that, and I'd be angry and I'd be upset, and then there'd be this sadness. And what would happen was that one of us would want to try and get rid of that feeling. And so the way it looked to us at the time was, well, we can just get back together again, right? So we think that the sadness and the whatever experience we were having was coming from the actual loss of the relationship. So, oh, I'm missing this person, and so I don't want to feel this way. So obviously I'll have to get back together again with them in order to not feel that sadness and that brokenheartedness. And this went on for a very long time until something happened. And I think we'd been together for what was 96, and then we broke up in 2000, and we really broke up. And there was kind of no going back from the situation that we were in at the time. And here I was, or now I understand, here we both were in this situation where we were desperately sad, desperately upset, and, didn't know what to do. And I was personally very devastated at this point, because the solution that I'd had to this feeling of sadness had always been to get back together. And here I was in a situation where that was no longer possible. So I was forced to sit with this discomfort and this sadness and this grief. And I thought it was never going to end. And I thought I wouldn't recover. And it really took time. But you know what? Over time, it started to improve. Over time, I started to come out of it. And I would even have moments. So I'd have these moments where I'd dip really, really low. And then for some reason, I'd come out of it again. And then I'd dip really, really low again. And then I'd come out of it again. And I was like, oh, okay. So maybe it is possible to come out of, brokenheartedness. But I didn't understand why back then. I didn't understand any of the stuff that you've been sharing on this, this group of talks and that sort of thing. And what I came to see as I became sort of more exposed to this understanding is that the secret to mending a broken heart is actually the same thing that enables us to have a better experience of actually being in relationship to somebody else as well. And what is that thing? So for me, what I've come to see is that everything I am experiencing moment to moment is never, ever, ever, ever coming from the circumstances of my life, right? And that's quite novel to someone that's never heard that before. But if you look to it, you can see that actually it's true. And what we can see about it is that if you observe how people react to certain situations, you'll see that people don't all react the same way. Like I deal with a lot of people who have health issues. And, you know, to some people, they get diagnosed with a health issue. And to some people, it's like, oh, well, this is the start of my life. And for other people, it's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing that could ever happen to me. Now, what it is that governs that difference in people's experience is thought, right? We all are living in this thought created reality. We are not living in a circumstance created reality or circumstance created experience. And so the more we can begin to recognize that, we can begin to see that if we're feeling brokenhearted, if our relationship has broken down, or you know something has happened and it's, you know, we're feeling that loss and that sadness, well, on some level, no matter how compelling it looks, the feelings that we're experiencing are not coming from the loss of that person. I know it really looks like they are, but it's just not true that they are. And the more we can begin to see that that's true, the more we open up to the possibility that not only do we not need to get somebody else to fill the gap to feel better, but actually we're opening up to the possibility of healing a lot quicker, right? And so if I try and explain a bit, so there's an analogy that I share with people. It doesn't matter what age they are. I share this with 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds. And it's kind of an analogy of how our experience works. And hopefully by sharing it, it'll help people see a bit about how they can mend brokenheartedness, but do it very organically. So the analogy is this. If you imagine that we are like a bus, right? So we're like a double-decker bus. And in London, we have those kind of route master buses where there's like a door at the front and a door at the back. And if you imagine that the passengers that get on that bus are like thoughts, right? So the bus trundles along from one stop to the next. And at each stop, a thought passenger gets on. Now, imagine you've broken up with someone. Well, maybe that thought passenger is a thought about your ex-partner or a thought about your relationship. Well, whilst that thought is sitting on the bus, you experience that the atmosphere of the bus is colored by that thought. You experience what it's like to have it on board. It might be sadness, it might be frustration, it could be many number of things. But the nature of that thought passenger, if you like, is that at some point, as the bus trundles along and goes from stop to stop, at some point, that passenger is going to go, oh, there's my stop. And he's going to go, right, I'm getting off the bus. And your experience, the atmosphere of the bus at that point is going to change. And it's probably going to be replaced by a thought about something else. Might be your dinner, might be your studies. It could be anything. None of us really know what it's going to be. But the important thing is seeing the transient nature of that experience and how every thought that we have and every experience that we have is never information or data about our life. It's information about thought in the moment, right? Now, where we get in a knot is if we start making up that we shouldn't be having certain experiences, right? So imagine, you know, you have an experience or you have a thought experience about your relationship and it feels bad. And then you go, yeah, but I shouldn't feel bad. I shouldn't be having these kind of thoughts. Well, that's like having a conductor on a bus that is busy monitoring for the passengers that get on. And the minute one of those passengers gets on, he goes, "Oi, you shouldn't be here." And he starts having a fight with that passenger. Well, then the bus gets really noisy. Then we start having even more thinking about how we are. Then we start feeling worse. And you know what then happens? That passenger can't get off the bus because we're too busy having a fight with it. Right? So the more we can begin to see that every experience we have, even if we break up with someone, or we lose someone that we loved or whatever, it's just like a passenger that gets on a bus. We experience it. It's normal, it's human, it's part of the human condition to have that kind of experience. But the freedom comes from seeing, oh, well, this is not data about what I've got to do. It doesn't mean I've got to get back with this person. Doesn't mean I've got to replace them with somebody else. Doesn't mean I've got to go find an antidote to the passenger that's on the bus. Because the passenger, its nature is to get off the bus. The nature of thought is for it to change and for it to be transient. Now, the more we can see that, the more mending from a broken heart is less about what we do and more about just understanding what the experience that we're having, if we're feeling sad or we're feeling grief or we're feeling frustration, is really made of. Because if you can see the normality of that experience and what it's made of, then you're never far away from it changing and it becoming something else. Right? Now, it turns out, as I said earlier, that the more we can see that this is how our experience works when we have a broken heart, actually works. It's the same thing that enables us to actually have a smoother experience of actually being in a relationship. Right? So when I have a fight with my wife, which inevitably happens from time to time, we're human, we see the world differently, and we end up having a disagreement. With this understanding, I am less inclined to think that there's something that is inherently wrong with my wife or my relationship, because I know that it's just the way I'm seeing the world in that moment. Now, that doesn't automatically mean I don't have a fight with her. I can still have a fight with her. I can still be doggedly stubborn that she is the cause. And it's something that she's done that is making me upset. But I'm also aware that on some level, that's not true, because my experience can't be created by her. It's created by whatever passengers are getting on my bus at that moment. Now, the more I see that to be true, it's kind of like this situation arises. So I'll be in a fight, but on some level, it's funny, because I'm going, yeah, I'm really thinking it's got something to do with you, Linda. And then there's this other part that's going, no, it's not. No, it's not. And at some point you're going to see it differently. Now, to see that means that I know that in those moments of disagreement, this is not data about the state of my relationship. This doesn't mean that we're not getting along. This doesn't mean that we need to get a divorce. This doesn't mean anything. It just means, oh, we're human. We sometimes get caught up in thought. We sometimes get lost in this illusion that our experience is coming from someone else. But if you have an inkling of an understanding that that is not how it works, then you are looking in the direction of being free. And it stops you making so much of a mess of things. It stops you wanting to overcorrect what you do, or over try to feel better, because you're never really far from feeling better if your experience is being made of thought. So that's what I thought I'd start with and share. And I don't know if there's any questions, or you got any questions, Anne. I'm happy to answer them and go wherever we go.
I think that's great. I love that. I haven't heard that about the bus before, and I think that's really great. I love it. If anyone, I'm sure you know already, but just in case anyone who's listening in would like to ask questions, you can type them in the chat box, or you can put your hand up and you can join us on the video if you'd like to. So I'll keep an eye out for, there aren't any questions at the moment, but I'll keep an eye out for that. And so, yeah, I was just laughing towards the end of that, of what you were saying. I was laughing because I actually, one of the things I wanted to do in my life, because my parents had some difficulties when I was young, was find what to do about how to help people be happy in relationships and how to be happy myself in relationships.
Yeah.
So after I did my medical training, I trained as a sexual and relationship therapist. And when I look at the hours that I spent doing that and what they taught us to do and how they taught us to do it, and how hard it all was. And then I listened to you saying everything that I needed to know in 5 minutes. I'm like, it's just really funny. And not only that, is when I first so I had at the end of my training in sexual therapy, my husband left me, which was a bit of a clue, really. And then I got married again and divorced again when I was in the middle of my NLP training, and still didn't understand. I went to psychotherapy because I was training as a psychotherapist. I went to therapy once a week for an hour or more than an hour, once a week for 2 years, and still had no clue what I was doing wrong in relationships and how to get it right and what was the problem. And eventually I gave up, and it was only when I came to this understanding, when I found out about this understanding many years later, that it all made sense to me. And it made sense to me also why some people that I was working with would get better, would have really, because they were having insights. It wasn't because of the techniques I was teaching them or the hours that I sat there listening to them, because it was very obvious to me that I was doing the same thing with different people, and some people were getting really great results and other people weren't going anywhere at all. So and then when I did come across this understanding, one of the things that impressed me the most was seeing how many people who understood what you've just been going through had amazing relationships, who were really happy. And not, as you say, they could have arguments and they could have, they would have normal relationships, but at the same time they were basically really happy and knew that things were not the other person's fault. Of course, that doesn't mean you put up with abuse, for example.
No, absolutely not.
What would you say about that? Maybe you could say a bit about that part.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is not so recognizing our resilience with our experience doesn't mean that we necessarily bypass what other people are doing, right? So it strikes me that this is not about saying, oh yeah, he just hit me and it's fine, or he just did something even worse, or he or she, I'm not meaning it to be any particular person. So, it's not about that. It's just about actually so much of the grief that we go through in relationships comes from the misunderstanding about the nature of our experience. So, how many people have gotten divorced because they think that their feelings about their relationship are coming from their partner, right? It can happen. I mean, that's why we used to break up, Linda and I, a lot, because it's like, oh, well, you made me feel bad. And it's like, well, maybe not. So there's something about seeing, okay, I experience thought in the moment. I don't experience what people do. But that doesn't mean that if someone was, say, abusing me or hitting me or something like that, that I'm going to use this as some kind of tool to make that okay. I don't think that's true. I think it's just much more about actually, okay, when we understand this, okay, it's like a damage limitation. It stops us from getting lost in knots. It stops us from making irrational decisions. It stops us from, breaking things which actually, breaking up relationships, which maybe are absolutely fine if we would have this understanding. But hey, sometimes what other people do is just unreasonable to us. You know, we have standards in our relationship, you know, which are made up. They are made up standards, but we're really good with the fact that they're made up and that they're there. You know, one of those standards is that we are monogamous. We don't go to other people. Now, we've never been in a situation where one or the other of us has broken that standard. And, you know, I hope we never are. But it's kind of, although we know that's a made up standard, it's something we're really good about. You know, we don't want to change. And so I don't think this is about saying, oh, I need to just always realize that I'm always living in thought all the moment. It's like, hey, yeah, maybe it's just fine that some of those things are just thought but look like more than thought. One of those things might be, hey, I'm not with a partner that abuses me. You know, it's not a way of kind of making everything okay, this understanding. Does that make sense, Han?
Yeah, totally makes sense. And also I've noticed that people, that doesn't mean to say that people stay together. You know, people who understand this doesn't necessarily mean they stay together, but it gives them a clearer understanding. And what I've noticed is that the people who do part do tend to part on much better terms, because they can see what is their decision and what is their thinking and what's the other person, and the other person has their reality. Just,
yeah,
we all have different realities, and it doesn't mean that we would want to live with everybody, does it? It doesn't mean that we would want to live with every other human being.
No.
So we still have preferences, even though that may come from thought too, but it's understanding where the experience is coming from helps. It doesn't mean that you have to put up with the experience, though.
Absolutely. And it also doesn't mean that, you know, as you say, relationships always stay together, or that you should always be with one person and not go to someone else, or, you know, all of these standards that we make up about relationships are often very unhelpful in many ways. Like, one that used to get me was that, you know, oh, well, if I have arguments with my partner, that must mean that we're having a bad relationship. And that used to cause me so much trouble, because, you know, and you watch like Hollywood films and you see people getting on fabulously and all this sort of stuff. And actually, it isn't true. I mean, maybe it's true for some people, but for most of us, we go in and out of our thinking. We get caught up sometimes, and we end up having disagreements with our partner and our loved ones and that sort of thing. And actually, that's normal. It's not actually a problem unless we're making up that we should always be happy, right? Now, if that looks true to us, if you really look at it, I think you can see that it isn't true. We're not always meant to be happy. We're not always meant to feel connected all the time. You know, in the same way a roller coaster has to go up, it also has to go down in order to work. So all of our experience is normal, and actually seeing, oh yeah, well, sometimes I'll feel connected to my wife and sometimes I won't. Now, what helps me in those moments of disconnection is knowing that, oh, well, I feel disconnected when my mind is busy, right? When my mind is full of thinking about me and her and my life and how I think it should be, I experience disconnection. But to know that because that disconnection is being caused by the fact that my mind is busy with thinking, well, because it's made of thought, at some point it will settle. At some point it will change, and the connection will come back again. Now, knowing that is like gold dust, because how many people get so concerned when they feel disconnected to their loved one, start to think there's some existential problem in the relationship, not realizing, oh, well, that disconnection just happens normally when we get busy-minded. Okay, well, at some point I won't be busy-minded and I'll be back to feeling in love and connection again. Good to know.
Certainly is. Yes, that's certainly what happened to me in my first marriage. All the time, I was like, oh my goodness, I've you know, I feel uncomfortable. Something's wrong. I need to, you know, he needs to change, or I need to change, or we need to go do something about this. And not surprised it ended, because, you know, And then when it did end, I was thinking about ending it because I was not happy with all the, and then when he actually ended it, and then I was like, then completely different thinking coming in, oh no, he's wrong and he shouldn't have done that. And I really love him. And, it was absolutely crazy. And like you said, sometimes up and sometimes down. And I was convinced that I was depressed and heartbroken for the next 2 years, probably.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm going to the therapy, right? But there were times, which I've mentioned before, but there were times when I would be doing something, like I learned to sail, and I would be driving home from sailing, singing along in the car and feeling lovely, and thinking, hang on a minute, that can't be right. I'm depressed. So even then I was going up and down, but it just still didn't twig. I didn't understand. I had not a clue. I still didn't understand why that was going on. So what changed for you? How did you get to understand that?
Well, I mean, I suppose I started to see this as a result of being, in this conversation and in this understanding. So, the more I started to see that actually it was true that my experience ebbed and flowed, right? I mean, my background was one of constantly trying to fix my experience. So I did, like you, I did all the NLP stuff, and I did all these modalities to try and feel better all the time. And actually, I was just really busy all the time, and all I seemed to be doing was faking myself into pretending I was feeling better, when inside I was like it was like a hamster on a wheel in there, trying to hold it all together and trying to, make myself all right. And I just started to get to this place where, when I stopped trying to feel better and stopped trying to make myself different to how I was, I noticed I kind of organically popped out of it a lot quicker than all those times when I'd been trying to make myself feel better. And so the more I saw that, because the other thing I saw too was when you're in a really low state of mind and you're reflecting on your relationship, everything looks terrible, right? There's nothing good about your relationship. There's nothing good about your partner. There's no redeeming features. You've never had a nice time. Like the mind, like when you're in that sort of state, nothing looks good. And what I started to see was, when I would come out of that, none of those judgments look true anymore. So I was like, I started to see, okay, part of the deal when you're in a low state of mind is that everything looks really bad, but it's very likely when you come out of it, it won't look that way anymore. And so I became less interested in acting on whatever thought came to me when I was in those low states of mind, because it became really obvious to me that, oh yeah, most of that just won't even look true in a day or an hour or whatever. So it was actually beginning to get sight of how thought worked and how my experience worked that started to make it a lot easier for me to navigate all of that stuff. And it speaks to what you were saying earlier, which is that this understanding is an understanding. It's not here's a 10 steps to mending broken hearts. It's when you get what's actually going on in your experience and you see it for what it is, because most of us don't see it for what it is. We're not taught it. When we see it for what it is, there are natural, organic behavioral changes that occur as a result of that understanding being more truthful. And that's all it is. That's all we're doing on these is helping people see, oh, what's actually true about brokenheartedness? What's actually true about our human experience? How does it really work?
That just reminded me too that when I was doing NLP and all the positive thinking and all of that stuff, as you say, I was very busy, but I was also very busy trying to make my partner do all of that stuff too, because
yeah.
Right, because it couldn't work if he wasn't doing it too.
Yeah.
She's like, and I couldn't get him to do it. So it was like, how is this ever going to work? And but the thing is, isn't it amazing? What I really love is that when one of you gets this, it doesn't even take both of you to get it. That
Yeah.
When one of you gets it, and when one of you stops reacting to thought, the whole dynamics in the relationship changes, and so the whole relationship changes. It's just, so it's so much better than all those relationship therapy where both of you have to go along and you have to do things in a certain way, and you have to make, what do you call it,
commitments to each other to change certain things, and
no, that's not the word I was looking for though. But when you have to, one of you has to give up something, or
right.
Do you know what I mean? You can't have things the way you want them to be. It has to be what's the word when it's anyway, whatever.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, it'll come to me in a minute. So yes, so it's, once you have the understanding, it makes such a huge difference to the other people around you, even when they don't know even if they don't know. So that's a really big thing too.
Yeah, I love that you shared that, because I often get people come to me and they say, oh, do you do couples, coaching? I'll be like, yeah, I do that. And then quite often they say, yeah, but it's only really me that is interested in doing it, and I can't convince my partner to come to this. And I'll be like, oh no, that's fine. And they'll be like, well, how can it work? And I'll be like, well, because your experience of your partner actually has nothing to do with your partner. And it's like I said earlier, it's not the most romantic thing to see, but actually it's true. Like, if you can begin to see that what you experience in the presence of your partner hasn't actually got anything to do with them, then you won't react so much to what they do. You won't get lost in the idea so much that what they're doing is making you feel a certain way. And that lack of reactivity in you, it's like what we have in coaching. It becomes like a transformative presence to the relationship. You may not actually even do anything different in that relationship, but the fact that you don't react to somebody else, to your partner's behavior, means that there's space and that they're more likely to settle down about things and see things differently too. And there's more of an inherent connection that remains in that relationship when we're not getting lost in all of our thinking about that other person. So it absolutely can transform relationships, even if you only work with one person.
Yeah, I think there's more to it than that as well. Not in that, if you're not reacting, if you're seeing where your experience is coming from and you're not reacting, you're in that space, as you say, as we are as a coach.
Yeah,
you're actually in love, aren't you? You're in, so they can't help but feel the loving, be in the love too, is basically. So it's much more difficult then for them to carry on in that, in whatever, anger or, yeah. I think, yes. The other thing that occurred to me to ask you about was, because you work with a lot of people with physical symptoms and physical illness and so on, it's just occurred to me that a lot of my work was with sexual problems, that people thought were physically based, and it was obvious to me that most of them weren't. Most of them had an underlying psychological, emotional, and now I know thought component. But at the time, it was quite difficult for me to get people to see that sometimes, because I hadn't a way of explaining it or helping them to see that.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that a lot of the people had been sent to me when I was working in the NHS, a lot of people were sent to me from the consultant gynecologist or the consultant urologist. They were sent by a consultant who'd said, oh, you have a physical problem,
Yeah.
so that was more of a challenge too. So how do you, okay, so let's just say someone has a problem with impotence, okay, because that was the biggest problem that was, or not the biggest problem, but the most common thing that men were sent with. And they are convinced that it's a physical problem. They've been to see the physical doctor and he said, oh yes, it's definitely a physical problem, but there's nothing I can do about it. Or how would you talk to someone about that, for example?
Oh gosh, I wasn't expecting this one.
I just thought it'd be something easy.
Yeah, just throw that one in. Hey John, see what you make of this. I mean, I've got a flag up front. I've never actually come across this particular one. So, everything I'm about to say is going to be laced with a big disclaimer of, hey, here's what occurs to me right now. So we'll see what we do. But it occurs to me that, that kind of connection we're talking about. So whether it is being emotionally connected at one with someone else in a mental, emotional way, is also what's there in a physical sense too, right? And so I can only go on my own experience here, which is that if someone is busy-minded and they are chronically thinking about how am I attractive, or they've got a self-consciousness, a lot of self-conscious thinking about themselves. Well, in the same way, that can create a sense of disconnection mentally and emotionally with somebody else. That has a physiological effect on the body. And a big part of my own journey with the principles was actually a healing journey. It was seeing how much living in chronic mental stress was actually at the source of me being ill for over 7 years. Now, when I started to get sight of how being in all of that literally adjusts my body chemistry, I can say that from what you've just asked me about, it would make sense to me that the same could also be true if somebody was dealing with something like impotence or some kind of physical sexual dysfunction. Now, it might look, and it could be that there is a physical reason, but it's very possible that if someone is living in that place, that would be that kind of chronic mental stress place, that would be a good place to look, to help them see the illusory nature of whatever is showing up in their mind when they are experiencing that problem, helping them to get sight of the fact that whatever thought is going through their head isn't data about them or their attractiveness or their ability or whatever it is that they might be thinking about when the problem arises. It's just noisy, smelly passengers that get on the bus sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Nothing you have to do anything with, nothing you have to pay attention to. And as they start to get sight of that, they'll be in thought less and more present and connected in whatever that might be, whatever way that might be in that moment.
Absolutely. I
really did pull that one out.
You did. I thought you'd like a little challenge.
Thanks for that.
But actually, you're completely right. For example, the people that I was seeing would be quite often men whose wife had died or whose partner had left them.
Yeah.
And were in a new relationship. And they would be either having a lot of thoughts about, oh, I'm not, should I be doing this with someone else, right?
Yeah.
Or so and they couldn't see that it was the thought that was doing that.
Yeah.
And certainly it makes a big difference to the physiology in exactly the way that you're talking about, exactly that way.
Yeah.
So, or sometimes it would be that they were thinking, my partner's left, and so will this partner, how am I going to get it right? Will this one leave me because I wasn't good enough?
Yeah.
And it's all to do, and of course, the more they think that, the more they're not going to be, because it's all the busy thinking is sending messages to the chemicals in the body, and the body's not working.
Yeah. Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of the physical doctors, at least in the time when I was trained, didn't understand that either. So they were trained, it will be a physical cause, and they were only trained in the physical causes. They weren't trained in looking at thought.
Yeah.
Hopefully in the future there'll be more of that, but it's really, you've got nothing to lose by looking to see, well, could it be thought? Could it just be, what would happen if I noticed what I'm thinking? And you don't, as you said, you don't have to change it.
Yeah.
You don't have to change it. It's just becoming aware. Is there busy thought? And allowing yourself to have the feelings, but not to take all that thought seriously. When you notice, I'm thinking, oh, I shouldn't be doing this with this person, or maybe I'm not good enough, or
I mean, that fight or flight response that arises when we are in resistance to our experience. I mean, that was where I had huge amounts of insight with my own physical health. I mean, when the body is in chronic fight or flight, it is not interested in, reproduction or digestion or immune system, correct immune system function, or healing the body in any particular way, because it's going, well, fight or flight, that means running from tiger. So not particularly interested in these kind of, supportive functions, because I could be eaten any minute. So a lot of what helps with this understanding is it helps people, when they get sight of the safety of their experience, how it's not actually meaningful in an objective way, then there's less of a need to resist it and fight it. And that actually helps to mediate that fight or flight response. That's a lot of the work that I do with people with health issues, because so many people, they get symptoms and they fight those symptoms. I got to fight this to be okay.
So it would be really helpful if you could go through that a bit. If you could go through what you do with people about physical symptoms. And I know we started off because, I mean, we even imagined that it's actually a physical broken heart, which of course it isn't, but it feels like that, right?
Yeah.
So it would be really helpful if you would go through the physical symptoms, and not the physical symptoms, the
physiology and how it relates.
The physiology, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've not got too much time, but I'll give a sort of overview. Is that the one of the things that we do as human beings is we seek peace, right? So we look for okayness, we look for well-being, we look for peace of mind, we look to be okay. And without this understanding, we look for it in according to standards that we've made up, right? So we might say, well, I'll be okay when I've got a nice job. I'll be okay when I'm in a relationship and I'm married with kids. I'll be okay when my bank balance looks like this. Well, it can also be the same for physical health. And people can go, well, I'll be okay when my physical health looks like X, Y, and Z. I'm not tired. I don't get headaches, I don't have whatever symptoms it might be, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the more that looks like a truth, all of those things, that paradigm of I'll be okay when, the more we end up living in this place of vigilance for our life, right? We're vigilant for our circumstances, desperately trying to do everything we possibly can to shape our lives to be a certain way. Now, that vigilance gets expressed physiologically, right? It gets expressed as a chronic resistance, as a chronic stimulation of the fight or flight response in the nervous system. And when we live in that place, we, as I said earlier, that part of the nervous system, if stimulated for long enough, will start to have physiological effects on the body, because the body is moving away from its normal state of rest and digest to one of fighting and flight, fighting, tigers and running away from danger, right? So your digestion is impaired, your immune system is impaired, all these things which are normal to health are basically shut off. And if you do it long enough, then It's like having a car whose service light has gone off at 10,000 miles and then you continue to drive for 30 or 40,000 miles without getting it checked by a mechanic. Things start to get a bit rattly. They start to get a bit rickety. Now, with this understanding, what it does is it helps us recalibrate where that peace of mind is, where that okayness really resides. It helps us see, oh, it's not out there. It's inside of me, and it's always inside of me. I won't always see it because sometimes I'll be busy minded. But if you know that what you're up against when you're not feeling okay is just transient thoughts like the sun coming and blocking the sun, like clouds coming and blocking the sun, then you're never really far away because at some point those clouds are going to clear. So seeing that for me was huge because it meant, oh, well, I can be okay even if I'm ill. I can be okay even if life doesn't look the way I need it to. Now, the more people start to get sight of that, the less vigilant they need to be for their life in general, and in particular for their symptoms. And the irony of it is that when people start to settle down into that space of well-being, and their nervous system also settles down out of fight or flight into rest and digest, well, it's like somebody going, oh, look, my service light did go off on the car. I better get to the mechanic. So it's like the body goes to its mechanic mode. The immune system starts to work better. Digestion starts to work better. Healing starts to work better. Hormone and neurotransmitter production starts to work better organically as a result of somebody dropping out of this chronic fight or flight. And all of it comes from waking up to the fact that, oh, my experience doesn't come from outside of me. It's coming from inside. And the nature of it is to settle. The nature of it is to balance itself out all on its own. That's probably the quickest I've ever talked about that. I don't know if that made sense.
Yes, totally, it did. And the other thing that's perfect, and that actually fits in really well with the physical side of things, but it also fits in really well and makes sense of what happens in relationships when we're really worried that, oh, I need to have this relationship, or I can't be happy, or I have to have a relationship or I can't be happy.
Yeah.
Which is how I was for most of my life, and partly why I went into all the wrong relationships, because oh, I can't be happy unless I'm in a relationship.
Yeah.
And whereas now I'm like, well, if I am, I am, and if I'm not, I'm. But that's the other thing, is once you know that you are whole in yourself,
Yeah.
which is the other part of this, right, that we haven't really spoken about. The other part of it is that we are whole, that we are actually life, that life is living through us as the human being. The human body is like a virtual reality headset, is the way I see it. It's a sort of virtual reality headset that we as life are living through.
Yeah.
And that we are okay, whatever. It's not the relationship that makes us happy, and it's not that we need any of those things. I don't think I'm making a lot of sense now, but
no, I'm hearing you. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, what came to mind as you were speaking, and I'm probably showing my age here, and the people who watch this will probably not even know this movie, but there was a movie called Jerry Maguire like 20 years ago or something like that. And I remember there was a bit in that movie, very Hollywood, where they talk about how, you know, one person in the relationship says, well, you complete me. And I was thinking, it's a really lovely idea, and it's really not true. And it really causes a lot of trouble, because the more people think, oh, there's someone out there that I need to be complete and that makes me whole and that makes me okay. Well, great. You're now coming to that relationship from a place of need. And, you know, people don't respond well to being needed and wanting to be controlled because you're needing them. It doesn't work well. So one of the reasons why I find my relationship with my wife a lot better now, it's not to say that I don't get lost in ideas of need. I do. but I see that that isn't true, right? It doesn't mean I won't get caught up in it. Sometimes I do, but I see that, oh, that's when it goes off track, when I start to think that I need something from her, or that I'm owed something from her, or whatever. Then I'm lost. I've lost track of my own wholeness, and the direction to look is actually not towards someone else or something else. Is to look back towards, oh, why am I not feeling whole? What's actually going on? And of course, when you start to look, you see, oh, here we are again. I've made something up. I've got lost in some made up idea I didn't even know was there until I went to look.
That's the other great thing, that was the biggest thing that I learned when I first heard about the principles and this understanding.
Yeah.
was that uncomfortable feelings do not mean there's something bad, something's going on and I need to do something about it, which is how I had always thought. Now I know just exactly what you've just said, that when I have uncomfortable feelings, it's just a sign that I'm taking notice of some thought that I haven't been aware of, that there's some thought, that some uncomfortable thought that I've been taking seriously, and I don't have to. And I don't have to know what it is. I just know that it's there and allow the experience to be there. That's rather than reacting to it, which is what I always did in the past. And that is such a disaster in relationships.
You know, one thing, and I don't know where we are with time, but it may be worth just flagging, is that it's to come back to what we were saying earlier, that this understanding doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, relationships are always meant to work, and that if you have this understanding, you can beat yourself up enough that you can make anything work, right? Because, is it true that on some level we can feel connection with anyone with this understanding? Well, I think, in an ideal world, if everybody had perfect thought recognition, that would be true. But actually, I don't know anybody that has perfect thought recognition. I certainly don't. The people that I've learned from certainly don't seem to either. I think there's probably a handful of people in this world, if any, that have that gift or have that level of seeing. And so it's worth saying that, okay, you might be having an uncomfortable thought. It might be looking like that thought or that feeling is coming from somebody else. You can reflect on it. You can look to your understanding to see if you can see something about the nature of it. See if you can see that it's thought. But it's also okay if you don't, right? It doesn't mean that you have to force yourself to see it so that you can stay in relationship. It is also okay for you to be human and to go, I'm sorry, this just looks real to me. And to not be with someone and to not beat yourself up about the fact that you and every other human being have imperfect thought recognition. We're not always going to see it.
I think that's beautiful. Yeah. And a good place to finish, I think. We don't think we have any questions at the moment. I'll just check on YouTube just to make sure.
Oh, can they ask on there as well?
Yep. I can't see any questions. I can see that there are, it says 2 people watching, but it doesn't say there are any questions. So,
okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. We're just getting to the end of time anyway. And thank you for watching, those of you who've been here. And we'll see you all again soon. Thanks very much,
everybody.
That's been brilliant.
Nice to see you.
You too.